From the 11 Alive studios, this is the Georgia Vote with Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant.
Welcome into the Georgia Vote. I'm Zach Merchant. Faith Jesse is on assignment. The big story this week: for about 48 hours, politics took a backseat as a devastating storm carved a path across our state. Helene arrived in metro Atlanta Friday morning as a tropical storm. With it came heavy rains and flooding. As the storm moved out, Governor Brian Kemp announced that initial counts showed 11 deaths in Georgia due to the storm. At points Friday, more than 1 million people were without power. At a Friday morning press conference, the governor said Helene's impacts may exceed the damage caused by 2018's devastating Hurricane Michael.
We know it's one of the widest wind fields ever in the Atlantic, which made it a statewide event for us here in Georgia. So we got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of damage to assess, but you know, we got a lot of hard-working, resilient people in this state, and we have a lot of people that are coming in to help us from out of state, and we're going to do whatever we need to help our people.
This is a developing story. We are going to continue to be there every step of the way as cleanup and recovery continue. You can follow our weather coverage throughout the aftermath of this storm and every time you need to know how the weather might impact your day. Look for our coverage on 11 Alive Plus, which is free to download on Roku, Fire TV, and Apple TV. Now, the storms this week forced at least one change in the presidential campaign season here in Georgia. Former President Trump's running mate on the Republican ticket, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, was scheduled for a multi-stop Georgia visit Thursday, but Helene had other plans. Vance was supposed to visit Macon and Flowery Branch, but postponed the trip because of the storm. The campaign says it will likely reschedule. And a few days before the storm hit, former President Trump, who won Georgia in 2016 but lost it in 2020, was in Savannah. The 45th president, who is hoping to become the 47th president, came to town with an economic message promising a manufacturing renaissance. He repeated proposals such as tax cuts and tariffs, which he argues will help bring overseas jobs back to the United States.
But with the vision I'm outlining today, not only will we stop our businesses from leaving for foreign lands, but under my leadership, we are going to take other countries' jobs. Did you ever hear that expression before? Have you ever heard that we're going to take other countries' jobs? It's never been stated before.
And on the Democratic side, it was a busy week of visits by supporters of the Harris-Walz campaign. Prominent Dems fanned out across Georgia, including at a gun safety event in Gwinnett County last weekend. Georgia Democratic Party leader, Representative Nikema Williams, joined Arizona Senator Mark Kelly and his wife, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, to discuss solutions in the wake of the shooting at Appalachia High School. Senator Kelly talked with 11 Alive one-on-one about Georgia's status as a battleground state.
So my hope is that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz win in Georgia. They win in Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and all these other states. Now remember, here in Georgia and in Arizona, it's going to be close. So people need to make a plan to vote because we can't have another 4 years of Donald Trump.
One thing everybody seems to agree on: the presidential race in Georgia is going to be close. Let's take a deep dive into the Georgia vote. NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki here now to break it all down like only he can.
All right, Georgia, you could decide the election. What are we going to be looking for on election night? Well, take a look at 2020. Remember, Joe Biden winning Georgia by the slimmest of margins. A few things to draw your attention to. The first, you could see it pretty easily, this big blue blob of counties in and around Atlanta. More than 40% of the votes statewide are going to come from inside this circle. I think you know this Atlanta metro area. It is growing quickly, and it is getting more and more Democratic. Democrats are counting on it becoming even bluer this time around, getting even more votes out of that sort of core area for them. Another place that's interesting, though, is just north, sort of the exurbs of Atlanta, talking about like Cherokee and Forsyth counties. Red counties, Trump counties, still expected to be Trump counties, but Trump lost ground in both of these counties in 2020 compared to how he did in 2016. They were less Republican. Does that trend continue? That's what Democrats are hoping for. Or can Trump win back some of what he lost in a Cherokee County, in a Forsyth County? That would bode very well for him on election night if that happens. Democrats are also looking at some of the smaller cities, Columbus, looking at Albany, Savannah. They're looking at Warner Robins as well. These are places where in that Raphael Warnock, Herschel Walker runoff a couple years ago, where Warnock outperformed Joe Biden, did even better. So Democrats are thinking they can get more support for Harris in some of those places. And, of course, there's a lot of rural counties here in South Georgia, a lot of rural counties with large black populations. Democrats are hoping they can increase their turnout, do better there perhaps than Joe Biden did. Republicans, though, also, you can see all the red down there. There's a lot of heavily Trump areas down there, too. Republicans just trying to squeeze more and more votes there. Is it going to be even closer than last time around? We're going to have a close eye on Georgia, certainly, election night.
Well, we have a list of resources to help you plan your vote, no matter how you decide to cast your ballot. Right now on the 11 Alive News app, we have information on early voting, including locations, times, and what you need to bring with you. Download the 11 Alive News app now, and it's free. The ongoing battle over Georgia's election rules is scheduled to head to trial this week. A group of state and national Democrats are asking a Fulton County judge to restrict the effects of two new rules or invalidate them altogether. The new rules, recently passed by a conservative majority on the state election board, give local election leaders broader powers to investigate perceived voting irregularities before certifying their results. Conservative state election board members argue the new rules will improve accuracy. Opponents, including Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, argue the changes come too close to Election Day and risk delays and confusion for poll workers. Fulton County Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney will hold a bench trial on Tuesday, but it is unlikely to be the last word. This is the kind of case where, no matter the result, appeals are likely. And if they do happen, Georgia's appellate courts will be under immense pressure to resolve it before Election Day. And this is not the only state election board controversy. Another newly passed rule now requires poll workers to hand count ballots. For a deeper dive into what the whole process could look like, here's Doug Richards with the 11 Alive political team.
With an unpredictable and volatile presidential race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris at the top of the 2024 ticket, it's a contentious election, before and possibly after the votes are cast. Now, counties are bracing to follow a new state election board rule requiring 3 election workers in each precinct to count the total number of ballots printed on Election Day.
I call it the poll worker cruelty rule that, it's just going to make for a much longer night for our poll officials to have to stay there.
Gwinnett County's election director is not a fan of the new rule.
They're not counting the actual races. They're just hand counting sheets of paper, and I just don't see a lot of value there.
The new rule does not require poll workers to actually count the votes. Machines will still do that. The poll workers will merely count the paper ballots, and then afterward, officials will match to see if the hand count of the paper matches the machine count of the votes. A Trump-friendly majority of the election board enacted the rule, members said, to add a layer of accountability.
What I don't want to do is set a precedent that we are okay with speed over accuracy.
Unless a court intervenes, Gwinnett County poll manager Francine Gadsden says she'll make the new rule work.
I think the numbers will match. What I think the issue will be is the length of time that it takes to actually count those ballots.
And that, she says, will add a couple of hours to election night for her poll workers. In Gwinnett County, Doug Richards, 11 Alive News.
More election news. The state Supreme Court disqualified 2 third-party presidential candidates and said votes for them will not count. The court unanimously ruled that presidential electors supporting Claudia de la Cruz and Cornel West failed to properly qualify, and without them, the candidates themselves are ineligible in Georgia. Their names will still appear on the ballot because the ruling comes too close to Election Day, but votes for them will not count. Next up, one-on-one with former state senator Jason Carter on his grandfather's upcoming 100th birthday and his own potential political future. And later, a Georgia voter beginning his 9th decade on Earth. How his years of experience will shape his vote. On October 1st, President Jimmy Carter will celebrate his landmark 100th birthday. In this week's Sunday Conversation, we sit down with his grandson, former State Senator Jason Carter, for an update on the former president's health and a look at whether Jason might be considering a second act in his own political career.
Let's start here. How's your granddad doing?
It's been a couple months, but it's been 19 months since he went into hospice, and he's really in the same situation. And all of us are amazed by the longevity of this period for him, this period of reflection for us and for everyone else. But there's still been virtually no change at all, and we're still just excited to have as much of him as we do.
What do you hope President Carter's legacy will be?
I think he has a complicated legacy, but it really boils down to me, and I think for him, that he lived out his faith and the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself in a way that made him respect people. And he used that respect to tell the truth. He used that respect to promote human rights. He used that respect to work with the least of these all over the world in a way that gave him partners in the poorest places in the world to do remarkable things.
You mentioned his faith. He is known world over as a man of deep faith. At the start of our conversation, you mentioned that he has been in hospice for 19 months now. What role has his faith played in this process and this journey for him?
I think this point of being in hospice, when he chose to forego any additional medical treatment, he was making a decision that he was ready for whatever God had in store for the end of his life. And that there's a part of that faith journey that you can only live at the very end. And he has been there in that moment for a very long time. And I think he has struggled with it at times. I think, I know for a fact that he's been frustrated with the sort of whatever this plan is. But I think he has given himself over in these last few days to God's plan in the same way that he lived out the rest of his life. So it's remarkable to watch.
Are there ever moments when you go down and you visit him now and you guys talk, you watch a Braves game, and you spend time together, and that conversation's over, and you walk back outside and you have a moment of sort of, whoa?
I mean, of course, there are moments where you're struck by different parts of my relationship with him. I mean, one of the great joys for me, not everybody gets to experience their grandfather until they're almost 50 years old. My children are 18 and 15. They have really long, deep memories of their great-grandfather, right? Those personal relationships are real and impactful just in that way. I mean, the things that I think about that stop me in my tracks about my grandfather are not about public legacy, but they're about the going fishing, or this is him teaching my kids how to shoot a gun or how to clean a catfish. I mean, those are the things that are the personal side for me that stop me.
I know President Carter isn't holding press conferences anymore. He's not doing rallies or big speeches or anything like that. He's at a different point in his life. If he could speak to Georgians right now, though, what do you think he would say?
I don't want to speak for my grandfather. I do know that what he has told us is that, yes, he's excited for his 100th birthday, but he's also excited to vote for Kamala Harris, right? He's waiting for his absentee ballot. He's going to cast that ballot. And I think he's ready, like many, many of us, to turn the page on this Donald Trump era of our politics. I think he also would say that he was in big politics as governor or president for 8 years. And the other 92 years, he was a citizen. And he considers that title to be the highest in the United States. And one of the things that citizens do is vote. And so I think fundamentally he would want to make sure people got out and exercised that right.
I do want to end here. You ran for governor about a decade ago. Mm-hmm. You spoke at the DNC this year. This is not the only interview you've done in recent years. Are you exploring a run for governor in 2026 when the race will be open?
I'm really not thinking about that right now. And that's what you say when you are running. But I'm really not thinking about it right now. I think that this presidential election is going to define our politics so much for the next decade that you really can't make decisions about what you're going to do after that until we get through this 2024 election. So that's an honest answer. That might sound like a politician answer, but it's true.
Not ruling it out.
No, I've never ruled it out.
And we will see what Jason Carter, a Democrat, decides. A 100th birthday concert honoring President Carter's legacy and his love of music will air on Tuesday night on Georgia Public Broadcasting. Jason says he and his family will be in planes with the president, watching the show and celebrating together. Stay with us. When we come back, we take a deep dive into how the Associated Press calls races on election night. Early voting begins October 15th. There will be obvious races on the ballot: president, Congress, and some state legislator contests. But what about those state amendments? Faith Jesse gets you ready to go to the polls.
It may feel like everyone is focused on the presidential race, but after you sift through the names, there are some important state measures Georgia wants you to decide. First is the creation of a state tax court. It's a proposed constitutional amendment. The tax court, or business court, will operate like our superior courts, but take on cases involving tax matters. However, the superior court can move a case to its jurisdiction if it sees fit. If created, chief tax court judges would serve 4-year terms. The governor would appoint them with approval from Georgia's Senate and House Judiciary Committee. A yes vote means you support creating a state tax court. No means you don't want to create a separate court. People will also see the local option homestead property tax exemption amendment. This is also a constitutional amendment. If passed, it would authorize the Georgia General Assembly to implement a statewide exemption from ad valorem taxes. This would create a statewide uniformity similar to exemptions several counties already have, like DeKalb, Gwinnett, and Forsyth. It would also create an option for local governments and school systems to opt out. A yes vote supports providing a local option homestead property tax exemption with an opt-out option. A no vote means you don't agree with the proposed amendment. Finally, Georgians will vote on a personal property tax exemption increase. The measure asks if you approve increasing the personal property tax exemption from $7,500 to $20,000. Personal property includes furniture, fixtures, machinery, and other property used in a business, as well as aircrafts and boats owned by an individual or corporation. A yes vote means you approve increasing the exemption to $20,000. A no means you're formally turning it down. As we get closer to Election Day, we'll be breaking down more issues on your ballot. Follow our coverage on 11alive.com/vote.
A lot to keep track of, and we will be following it all on election night. And as election night drags on, you've probably heard us and others over the years say that the Associated Press has called the race for one candidate or another. But what does that actually mean? We sat down one-on-one with the AP executive editor, Julie Pace, who says their team uses a combination of sophisticated mathematical models and experienced human editors to track ballot returns and project winners.
Sometimes we'll see AP call a race, and candidates or candidate supporters will say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Mm-hmm. Ballots are still being counted. How could you say with certainty that this race has been decided?
Yeah.
How do you do it?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I think it again goes back to the preparation that we do, the historical understanding that we have of these races, and also the statistical models. So, first, it's important to note we will not call a race while polls are still open. So we want to make sure that voters have the chance to cast their ballots before we would ever call a race, and that's really important. And our standard, when we're going to call a race, is very simple. We look at the worst case scenario. Is there any mathematical way that the trailing candidate can catch up? And if that is possible still, we won't call the race. When we're certain that the trailing candidate cannot catch up, then we'll call the race.
Official final results here in Georgia will still come from the Secretary of State's office, but the AP's calls provide an early and usually decisive look at the race's likely outcomes. Our voice of the voter is next. Decades of experience give him a unique view of today's politics. We talk with him next. Stay with us. As Election Day gets closer, you can expect more visits from the presidential campaigns and their supporters. But everyday Georgians, as always, remain at the heart of this contest. After all, you can't have the Georgia vote without Georgia voters. This week's Voice of the Voter is Willie Barnett. He lives in Atlanta and has been voting since the 1960s. He talked with Faith Jesse.
I am 80 years old. I feel great. This is the A.G. Rose Wellness Center on Boulevard in Atlanta, Georgia. That is me. The one and only me.
This is the whole community of A.G. Rose.
Yes.
And how long have you lived here?
3 years. I enjoy being here because I had a stroke.
This area, this is where you grew up.
Yes. King Center's right up the street. There's a lot of history here.
When is the first time you participated in a presidential election?
The first time, it had to be 1962.
Wow.
The reason I say this is because I turned 18 that year.
So talk to me about how that time was. As we know, the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965.
That time, I was one of the guys in the neighborhood who felt like everybody should vote.
What would you say is different from 1962 to 2024 right here in Atlanta, Georgia, in an election year?
The convenience of voting. At that time, it was very inconvenient for people to vote, black people. There were those that wanted to vote, and there were those that were afraid to vote, meaning that a lot of them wouldn't go because of fear.
What is going to be the biggest issue driving you to the polls?
My grandkids, my son, and my entire family, I like for them to vote, and I think I have enough influence over them. If I go, they say, well, I'm going if he go.
So your biggest motivation to get up and vote now in 2024 is to encourage your sons and your families to continue that?
Yeah, all of my family.
There's a lot of talk about the state of the economy. There's a lot of talk about abortion rights, guns, safety. Are there any of these type of topics that kind of stick out to you that you care about a lot?
Guns. I had a son, my third son was killed a couple of years ago. And I just have this thing about guns now. I just wish we could deal with that.
Gun laws in Georgia need to be dealt with, in your opinion?
In the country, period, not just Georgia, because Georgia's not the only state that had problems. I said Georgia because my son was killed here. It's in a lot of places.
We always like to end on one question, and that is, what are you optimistic about?
Kamala Harris being president. I would like to see that very much. Well, I live to see a black president. Now I would like to see a female black president. And I think Kamala Harris is qualified. I just hope things work out.
Mr. Barnett has seen so much history in his time here in Georgia, and we're so grateful to him for sharing his perspective with us, like we are for all of our Voice of the Voter guests, and like we are for you for watching us today. We hope to see you back here again next Sunday at 11 for another edition of the Georgia Vote. We'll see you then.